No, I've been pretty consistent that it's going to be Jameis Winston, and there's a lot of rumors floating right now that maybe Marcus Mariota is more in the mix than we thought. But I posted on Twitter today. I said a great quote from Edgar Allan Poe. He said, "Believe only half of what you see and nothing that you hear," and that's a perfect thing to say at this time of the year. It's very much silly season. Teams are putting things out there for misdirection. To advance their own agenda, maybe to try to bring in some trade offers. So it's a time of the year where you should look at everything you hear with a very critical eye and try to figure out what is the underlying reasons for why that's out there.
Yeah, I know in the past we've talked, you like Winston as a player, but how much of his off-the-field stuff could come into play in these next couple of weeks? We're 17 days away. How much could the off-the-field stuff, continue to get teams worried?
Well, there's no question it's going to be a concern. But Marcus Mariota is a risk, too. Marcus Mariota is a risk for different reasons, but there's very few things in the NFL draft. A guy like Andrew Luck or Peyton Manning only comes around once every 15 or 20 years. But Winston, assuming you can get comfortable with him off the field, and the ironic thing about Jameis Winston is for some of the awful decisions he's made off the field, on the field, he is the consummate field general. He has ice water in his veins. He's a hard worker. He's smart. He's a leader of men. He has all of those things you look for. And at the end of the day, I just think teams are going to be willing to overlook a lot with Winston because he's the rarest of commodities, which is a franchise quarterback. And I said before, and I'm staying with it, if not for the off-the-field concerns, Winston would be the third best quarterback prospect I've graded behind only Andrew Luck and Peyton Manning. Now, granted, it would be a distant third, but that's pretty rarefied air he's in. And I truly believe he's the type of a quarterback who can come in and really instantly turn around the fortunes of a franchise. If he goes to Tampa Bay, for example, I think they're going to be right near that 500 mark right away next year. So Jameis Winston, he's a potentially transcendent talent. It's just a matter of getting him to mature and do the right things off the field.
Scott, what about Mariota in terms of, you talk about Winston and where his talent is. Do you look at Mariota as a special talent, just an average guy who happens to be in a bad quarterback class? How would you describe the ceiling of Marcus Mariota?
Well, I have Mariota as my number 3 player in this draft. Number 1 is Leonard Williams from USC. He's the only player I gave my elite grade to. The number 2 is Winston. And then there's a drop-off, and then I think you could probably throw maybe 6 to 10 guys in a hat. But I gave Mariota the edge for number 3 simply because of the positional value. And the 2 big question marks with Mariota are, 1, the system. And it's just because he didn't run a pro-style system in college doesn't mean he can't. It's just more guesswork. Whereas with Winston, we've seen him do what they're going to ask him to do in the pros. And then the second thing is there's some concern about Mariota's personality. By all accounts, he's a great kid, but they're wondering if he has that X factor. Is he the alpha dog who's going to be a leader of men in a locker room and in the huddle? So those are the concerns, but at the end of the day, especially in this quarterback class where there's so few options at that position, maybe only 2 legitimate potential starting quarterbacks in this class, Mariota, he's going to go somewhere in that 2 to 5 range, and I think somebody's going to trade up for him. It's just a matter of who and when. But the other thing, too, with Mariota is the guy he most often gets compared to is Colin Kaepernick. And in that style of quarterback, it's fun to watch, but it hasn't necessarily translated into championships at the pro level for the most part. It's pocket passers that win Super Bowls. So it's nice that Marcus Mariota can run and make plays with his feet, but at the end of the day, it's going to be a risk. And for me personally, if running is in the top 5 traits for a quarterback, that's alarms go off in my head because I don't want a quarterback that runs. Quarterbacks that run get hit, and quarterbacks that get hit get hurt. And if your quarterback goes down, your season's over. So there's risk associated with Mariota, but at the end of the day, he has all the tools that you look for in a franchise quarterback, and he belongs in the top 5.
Scott Wright, the president of DraftCountdown.com, the NFL Draft 17 days away. Scott, Brett Hundley, he was recruited by Chip Kelly at Oregon. He decided to go to UCLA. Then he turned his attention to Marcus Mariota. We now know the rest is history, but now, 4 years later, is Brett Hundley a guy that would be an intriguing fit for Chip Kelly at the pro level?
Well, assuming the Eagles are still interested in bringing in another quarterback, I think Brett Hundley would be a great fit in the 2nd or the 3rd round. And I'm not convinced that Chip Kelly is still interested in a quarterback. I think he's made it pretty clear so far that he really likes Sam Bradford, and they re-signed Mark Sanchez. But if they're not sold, I think Hundley would be a great developmental quarterback. And Hundley, you can make an argument that he's a top 10 overall type of talent. He has that type of high-end starting quarterback upside. It's just very inconsistent and very rough around the edges. He's very much a project, and I wouldn't be shocked if he got pushed up around earlier than he should go, or maybe even falls around further than people expect him to go. I really think it's that wide of a range, because when it comes to quarterback, I think we've seen in recent years all bets are kind of off at that position. Different teams have different preferences, and Hundley, I've compared him in the past to, if you're walking in the desert and you're dying of thirst, a thimbleful of water looks pretty good. And for all his flaws, Brett Hundley could be that thimbleful of water, because he at least has the tools that you look at him and say, okay, I could envision him being a really good starting quarterback in the NFL, because honestly, beyond Winston and Mariota, it's basically long-term projects or career backups. So if you need a quarterback this year, you better get one really early.
Yeah, so Eagles at 20, if they took – now, obviously, you mentioned Bradford, and we don't know what his status is. He only got a one-year deal, but if they took Hundley at 20, is that a mistake?
I think that would be a huge mistake. I actually have Brett Hundley going in the third round in my most recent mock draft. I could see somebody taking him in round 2 if they're desperate, but no, if he goes in the first round, there's nothing about his film that says first-round pick. In fact, you can make an argument that there's more instances where he looks like a late-round pick than an early-round pick on film. He's just so inconsistent, and he's going to require a lot of work. But with Chip Kelly's system, he might be a better fit than most, because he is a terrific athlete. He's kind of like a running back in a quarterback's body, and I compared him to Jake Locker. I think he's a very much a boomer-bust type of prospect, but if you're desperate, I'd rather take a chance on Hundley than any other quarterback in this class beyond Winston and Mariota. But he's got a battle on his hands. Don't be shocked if Bryce Petty from Baylor goes ahead of him, and maybe even Garrett Grayson from Colorado State. Those are the three guys that are kind of competing for quarterback slots 3, 4, 5, whether it be in round 2 or 3.
Where do you have Hundley on your list of quarterbacks? We obviously know the top 2. Is he 3, 4, 5? Where do you have Brett Hundley?
I have him number 3, personally, just because I think he has the most upside in comparison to maybe a Petty or a Grayson. But like I say, there's a huge drop-off after Winston Mariota. In fact, if Connor Cook from Michigan State had come out, I think he might have been a first-round pick, and he would have definitely been the third quarterback in this class. Even Cardale Jones from Ohio State, who might end up being the third stringer for the Buckeyes this year, I would have had him rated ahead of Hundley. And just for a little more perspective, last year Jimmy Garoppolo was a late second-round pick to the Patriots. I think if he were in this class, he'd be the third quarterback. So it's just a really bad crop of signal callers. On average, there's about a dozen drafted over the last decade or so. This year, there's honestly maybe 6, maybe 7 that I'd be willing to invest a draft pick in tops, and that might be a stretch. So it's just a really bad year for that position.
Yeah, and we know the Eagles with Sam Bradford, so quarterback may or may not be something for them, maybe something more in the second or third round. How about wide receiver? Obviously, the Eagles very light at wide receiver. We know Kevin White. Some people like him as the top receiver. Other guys may go with, obviously, Amari Cooper as their top receiver. But after those two, what is your take on the wide receiver position in terms of that first-round area? If you're sitting at number 20, is there someone in that first round after those two that you like?
Yeah, absolutely. And don't forget Devontae Parker from Louisville, who's just off that top tier of White and Cooper, and I think Parker is going to go somewhere in the top 15 overall. But then it's going to be interesting to see where that run on the second tier of pass catchers starts. And it could be the Eagles. They're going to be in contention. They've been linked to both Jalen Strong from Arizona State, who would be a possibility in round 1, or even Nelson Aguilar from USC, who would be a round 1 maybe, or a round 2 possibility for them. So I would not be at all surprised to see Philly bring in a pass catcher relatively early on. And those are the main candidates, along with Rashard Perriman from Central Florida, and then Dorial Green-Beckham from Oklahoma is kind of the wild card. Arguably a top 10 overall talent, but could slide into the second round due to character concerns. But even if you don't get one of those top 2 or 3 pass catchers, there's terrific depth this year, and you're going to be able to get one not only later in the first round, but well beyond the first round. It's not as good as last year's almost historic crop of pass catchers, but it's pretty darn good, and you're going to be able to get a starting caliber player second round, third round, fourth round even. And the Eagles are definitely know that. They got Jordan Matthews in round 2 a year ago, and in most years he would have gone in the first.
Scott, I want to ask you about a couple of guys who have been in here recently for workouts. Let's start with Eric Rowe. Obviously, the Eagles are looking for versatility, it seems like, in that secondary. What do you know about him?
Yeah, absolutely. Eric Rowe is a guy with a lot of helium right now, to the point where there's talk that he could go late in the first round. So if he really is the apple of Chip Kelly's eye, they might have to pull the trigger as early as number 20. But in my new mock draft, I actually have them taking Rowe in the second round. A kind of, like you said, a tweener, can project cornerback or safety at the next level. 6 foot and 3/4, over 200 pounds. He runs a legit 4.4. A lot to like about Eric Rowe, and he's right there on that first day one, day two fringe. So I think he's very much a target for the Eagles, whether it be in round 1 or round 2.
All right, Byron Jones, another corner from UConn. His name has been brought up a lot around here as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Byron, kind of a similar situation stock-wise to Rowe, where he's in that late first, early second round range. And it's a misconception that Byron Jones has just moved up draft boards based on his incredible workouts. And some of his workout numbers were just absolutely freakish. We're talking world record caliber. But he was already a highly regarded prospect before all along, and he was just flying under the radar to a degree because he had his senior season end prematurely due to a shoulder injury, and then he wasn't able to participate in the Senior Bowl. But he's always been considered a legitimate top 100 candidate, and in my most recent mock draft that I just updated today, I have him going number 32 overall to the New England Patriots.
Scott Wright, the president of DraftCountdown.com. We're taking a look at some of the guys that have come in for workouts. And you also have Lael Collins, the LSU offensive tackle. And we talked about it last time, that don't be surprised if Philadelphia has to go offensive line around number 20, and that might be a good value spot to get an offensive lineman in this draft because their guys are older, and, of course, they let a couple guys go.
Yep, absolutely. They've already parted ways with Todd Hermans, and there's talk that Evan Mathis might be on the trade block. So I think they're definitely going to be looking for some reinforcements on the interior of the offensive line. And Lael Collins, his versatility is both a blessing and a curse. On one hand, it's nice that you have a guy who can play left tackle, right tackle, or guard, and has been effective at all three positions against elite competition, the SEC. But it also leaves some uncertainty as to where his best fit is going to be. So, yeah, I think somewhere in the back half of that first round, Collins is going to come off the board. But I definitely think that's going to be a priority for Philadelphia. And once again, in my most recent mock draft, I actually had him taken Ronis Grasu, the center from Oregon, who obviously is uniquely prepared to run that fast-paced system of Chip Kelly, and maybe they could kick him over to guard, and that could be a solution for them as well. And guard is a strong position this year. I know it's not real sexy to talk about the interior blockers, but I really like this guard class, and I think you're going to be able to get a starter even on the third day. So I think Philly, I don't know if it's going to be a first-round priority for them, but I do expect them relatively early on to bring in an offensive guard.
Earlier we were talking with one of the guys who covers the Eagles, and he said, a lot of people will have a draft board, and they'll have guys ranked. Do you think with Chip Kelly's scheme, that in his scheme, his draft board will look vastly different from the conventional team's draft board?
No question at all. And really that goes for every team in the league. Every team is looking for different types of players, and they have different traits that they favor. So no question about it. And I think that's one thing that people don't realize, too, is my rankings, for example. I'm just trying to do rankings kind of as a universal for all systems, just ranking the talent. But that's not the case. Every draft board looks dramatically different. And I'm sure Chip Kelly is no exception. And I mentioned Ronis Grasu, but even Jake Fisher, another Oregon offensive lineman, I think could be a fit for Philly. He's a guy who can play tackle or guard. He might come off the board kind of in no man's land for Philly. 20 would be a little too early, but I'm not sure he's going to make it till their pick in the second round. But if they maneuver a little bit, I think Jake Fisher could be a really good fit for Philly as well. But no question about it, every team's draft boards look dramatically different.
You said earlier that, this is the smokescreen time of the draft with 17 days left to go. Everybody's putting some things out there. But are there guys in these last weeks or so moving up that have made some significant gains and moved themselves up?
Well, I think one thing that's still coming up here is we're going to have the scouting combine medical rechecks. So guys who have some injury or durability issues, their stock could be affected by how that goes. But by and large, there's not a lot of major changes on draft boards this time of the year. It's mainly just shuffling within the individual tiers. You don't have a seventh rounder that moves up to the fifth round or a fifth rounder into the second round or anything of that nature. by this point, most draft boards around the league are pretty settled. And really, I think the only thing that affects them is either something medical or in the case of a guy like P.J. Williams, the cornerback from Florida State, recently got picked up for drunk driving, which is never a good idea a month before the draft. And he's obviously going to slide to a certain degree. Randy Gregory, the pass rusher from Nebraska, failed his drug test at the scouting combine. So his stock is a little uncertain right now. But I think that's where you see the shuffling in the rankings right now. But by and large, I think teams are pretty comfortable with their evaluations of the players and their grades, unless something crops up here in the stretch run.
All right, Scott, you mentioned your new mock draft. Did it go up today? Would it go like 10 minutes ago? I mean, earlier today, I don't even know that I saw it up there. And now all of a sudden, boom, here we go. And you have Jalen Strong going to Arizona, from Arizona State going to Philadelphia. His name has been mentioned a lot recently. Tell us a little bit more about him and why he'd be a fit for Philly.
Yeah, Jalen Strong is a really good player. And a former junior college transfer, had a couple of extremely productive years for the Sun Devils, and great size. He's 6'2" and 3/8", 217 pounds. Excellent ball skills, body control, reliable hands. The one big question mark that they had about Jalen Strong was speed. He's not necessarily a vertical threat, but he ran a lot better than expected. He ran 4.44 at the scouting combine and kind of alleviated those concerns. So he's very much in that mid to late first round mix. And like I said, he's one of the receivers that I've heard strongly linked to Philly along with Nelson Aguilar from USC.
Yeah, and if all right, Strong's there, Landon Collins, he's a safety. The Eagles obviously are looking for safety help. You obviously, in this particular mock draft, went with Strong, but do you like Collins or Strong better as a pro?
Well, and this is, I think, where strategy comes into play in the NFL draft. You have to kind of look at the landscape in what position are you going to be able to address in the second round. I think you have a much better chance of getting a really good receiver in round two, but the safety class is lackluster. I think Landon Collins is clearly the number one guy, although Demarius Randall, another Arizona State product, is kind of making a push. But I just think I'd rather have Landon Collins in round one, and then I'm confident there's going to be a good receiver available in round two. Maybe not Nelson Aguilar, but maybe a Devin Smith from Ohio State, a Sammy Coates from Auburn, a Philip Dorsett from Miami. Even further down in round three, Justin Hardy from East Carolina, Tyler Lockett from K-State, Rashad Green from Florida State. So terrific depth at the wideout position this year. And I think it's similar to last year in that you're going to be able to get wideout maybe a round later than you usually would just because there's so much depth. So I think that has to be a factor in the decision-making process for these teams because the safety position drops off pretty quickly.
All right, the NFL Draft coming up on April the 30th. You can hear it right here. First round coverage, 97.3 ESPN. Scott Wright of DraftCountdown.com. Check out his latest mock draft. It is up currently at DraftCountdown.com. And we know the draft 17 days away. Very interesting this year with all of the – have you ever remembered a time where one player like Marcus Mariota's name has been so attached to a team that is so far away from where he's projected to go?
No, I really haven't. And just the uncertainty with Mariota as a whole, because usually teams picking at the top of the draft, they're picking there because they have major issues at the quarterback position. But the Titans at 2 seem inclined to stick with Zach Mettenberger or maybe trade for a veteran. Then you have the Jaguars at 3 and the Raiders at 4. They already got their young signal callers. So I think most years Marcus Mariota would be a lock for the top 2 or 3 overall. It's just kind of a unique situation with the draft order this year. And as I mentioned, I firmly believe somebody's going to trade up for Marcus Mariota. It's just a matter of who and where, and that's a $64,000 question because once you slot Mariota, I think the other pieces are starting to fall into place for the top 10, but where Mariota is going to land is still a huge mystery.
All right, for more on the draft, DraftCountdown.com, and hopefully, Scott, we can catch up a couple more times before the 30th. Thanks, buddy.
My pleasure. Anytime.